Bienvenidos todos al taller de Best of Now, no, sí, Best of Best de Kelly Gordon. Este encuentro es parte de nuestro programa de arte e imagen en movimiento Global Visions. Durante el mes de febrero y marzo empezamos con la inauguración de Focus, Jonathan Monaghan, en esta misma sala, y esta exhibición aún puede verse en el Museo de Arte Contemporáneo del Zulia, en Maracaibo. Kelly Gordon, quien nos acompaña hoy, es nuestra invitada, es la curadora de este programa y hoy nos sentimos muy contentos de poder tenerla entre nosotros.
Thank you for joining us. This is going to be a kind of magic carpet ride through recent history of art. It's very subjective, and I'll try to explain why I chose these and how they're organized. And first I wanted to say, video art usually refers to anything that is moving image, which can be also film or digital. It can also sometimes be called time-based art, but time-based also embraces performance, so there's a little bit of a difference. And there are various banners that have flown over this kind of work. Essentially, it moves and it sucks up time, and you have to plug it in. Sometimes it's multiple projections, sometimes it's singular projection, sometimes it's sent to your phone, sometimes it's on the wall. It can encompass a few seconds, or actually hours and hours and days.
Ok, Kelly estaba un poco preocupada cuando hacen una presentación tan grande y tan fabulosa como la que Rodi le hizo, porque pareciera que se tratara del propio funeral de uno, que ella se imagina que en realidad cuando venga su funeral lo que va a decir es que ella veía, ella miraba. Bueno, gracias por acompañarnos aquí en este viaje a través del Moving Image Art, que va a ser muy subjetivo. Ella va a tratar de explicar un poco cuáles son los trabajos y por qué los está mostrando. Pero primero quería hablarles un poco de qué es, de qué trata, porque hay como muchas etiquetas y muchas formas que entran dentro de lo que es el arte de la imagen en movimiento. Puede ser videoarte, arte de medios basados en el tiempo, pero que este es un término que también incluye el performance, que es otra cosa que no es moving image art, porque básicamente es algo que se mueve, que transcurre en un tiempo y que uno enchufa, y que puede ser desde una cosa que va en varios proyectores hasta cosas que aparecen en pantallas pequeñitas o web y que puede durar desde unos segundos hasta horas.
I also confess that I backed into this specialty. I studied medieval art history, and in a million years I would never have guessed that I ended up in the most contemporary part of contemporary art. And the way it happened is I took an internship. I really thought I was headed to sort of academia and teaching medieval art history. And I found that I loved to be in a building with art so much that I knew that that's what I needed to be. I just wasn't sure what kind of art. I began with a film program of avant-garde film, and it grew as this area grew. In about 1999, there was kind of a shift where video work had been marginalized, but suddenly it was starting to get treated with the same, I guess we say, respect as painting and sculpture. And today, if you go to a contemporary art museum, you expect to find at least one thing that is moving image.
En realidad, empecé a estudiar historia del arte enfocándome en el arte medieval. Y realmente, si en ese momento me hubiesen preguntado, yo no me hubiese imaginado nunca que iba a terminar trabajando en este campo. ¿Cómo ocurrió que terminara aquí? Porque empecé en una pasantía, porque pensaba que iba a dar clases acerca de arte medieval y empecé a trabajar en un edificio, amaba estar en un edificio que estuviera lleno de arte y allí había un programa de videos que para 1999 hubo un cambio porque previo a esto el video había estado un poco marginado y bueno, a partir de 1999 hubo un cambio que se ha ido proyectando hacia lo que, como se trata ahora, el video y la imagen en movimiento, que es absolutamente contemporáneo y uno no esperaría ir a un museo de arte contemporáneo y no encontrar al menos una pieza de video.
When I started in this realm, an English professor of mine who was also part-time film critic said, "You need to understand, the most precious thing that anyone has is the number of minutes they have left on Earth. So you should choose very carefully because you're endorsing that they invest in something you selected." And I was in my 20s and I was like, could you make it any heavier?
Ok, cuando ella estaba estudiando, un profesor de inglés que también era crítico de cine, que allí estaba en sus 20s y a ella le pareció, wow, nos la podrían poner más fácil.
However, not only is that something I try to keep in the back of my mind as I've made selections, but not long after he said this to me, I was at my desk and I get a call from a lady and she said, "I'd like to come and see this movie that you're showing. It's 3 hours long and it's by Chantal Akerman. And what I'd like to know is, could I see it prone, laying down?" And I said, "Yeah, we have benches. I think I can organize this, but may I ask you why?" And she said, "I've been reading about Chantal's work. I've been reading about this film, and it's something that I'm suffering from leukemia, and it's something I want to see before I die." So,
Ella siempre he tratado de tener esta idea en mi cabeza cuando estoy seleccionando las piezas. Pero entonces quería contarles que cuando estaba trabajando, posterior a esto, estábamos presentando una película de Chantal Akerman que duraba 3 horas. Y llama una persona, una señora, preguntando que ella quería ver esta película que estábamos proyectando, que había estado leyendo acerca de Chantal Akerman y de esta película en específico, pero preguntó que si sería posible que la viese recostada, acostada, y pues Kelly se sorprendió un poco, le intrigó por qué, y quiso saber por qué. Y la señora le dijo que tenía leucemia y estaba batallando con ella, pero realmente ver esa película era algo que ella quería hacer antes de morir.
and I tell you this so you will know how grateful I am that you've chosen to trust me with your precious time, and I thank you in advance for your patience as we navigate through some media works that I've found particularly illuminating.
Mi gratitud de que hayan decidido darme la confianza de estos preciosos minutos de tiempo, de su tiempo, y les agradezco también de una vez por su paciencia a medida que naveguemos por estos trabajos multimedia que he encontrado particularmente iluminadores.
And what we're going to focus on today are a few political works, and then a few works that take something from the everyday, something ordinary, and make it extraordinary. And then toward the end, what we'll talk about is some technological advances that have opened the field or changed the field or added to what's possible.
Primero vamos a hablar de algunos trabajos un poco políticos, luego de varios trabajos que toman algo del día a día y lo hacen extraordinario, y hacia el final vamos a ver algunas piezas.
A lot of trepidation about showing anything that was more than 3 or 6 minutes long. But now, I notice people will sit longer, and not only that, but they often see something 3 and 4 times, even if it's quite long. And I have a theory. I think part of it is that because this has become a language for people making their own, the first time they're watching it as art, but then they're watching it for techniques and ideas and camera angle, and it's become an international language that is very fluid, very fluent. And I tease my colleagues. I say, really, how long does somebody sit in front of a Rothko? And I said, I have people that are sitting in my space for 2 hours, so. It's, again, it's a different world than when things began with moving image. Let's see some art. The first artist that we're going to look at is Junyon Hachuchiba, who is of Japanese and Vietnamese heritage. But first I want to ask you a question. Do you know that feeling sometimes when it's hard to get up and get going and you feel like your batteries have run down and it's a struggle to move or breathe? This work was done as a commission, and it's part of a trilogy called the Memorial Project for Nha Trang, Vietnam, for the courageous, the curious, and the cowards. And what he did was he used the old rickshaw, which is called cyclo, and for the modernizing post-war Vietnam, it was thought to be colonial and old world, so they were trying to ban them. And even though they're a very environmentally friendly way for people to travel, they felt that it hung up the traffic and that it stood for something of the past that they wanted to remove. So what he did was he got fishermen who were also divers. He also had to get himself certified as a diver in order to make this, and they filmed this in the Indo-Chinese Sea. And the way it starts out is it's kind of the ocean floor, and then it gets more and more rocks and other challenges. So when I asked you about waking up in the morning, it gets harder and harder. And because it's underwater, occasionally they'll go up to get air and then come down, and it becomes this arduous, strenuous activity that, despite the historic implications and the specific implications of Vietnam, it also, for me, is like the myth of Sisyphus, of rolling, constantly. It's never done. And here, the overwhelming power, of course, is the sea. So it took about a year in his mind. It took several months to produce. It took 10 days to shoot. And he used a single Muni DV camera, which was all he had, with the housing of an underwater camera housing. So the actual way it was shot is really very basic, almost like home style equipment. And he's a very politically engaged artist. He has an ongoing project called Breathing Free, 12,753.3 kilometers. And the idea is he wants to run the diameter of the Earth, and he does it in sections. And his idea is as a metaphor for the various refugees who are continuously on the run. And he's been doing this he adds sections to it. And what's interesting to me in this work is that this otherworldly image of running in water is a commentary not only on worldly matters, but also on national identity, but even more so on human survival. I should also say that when it's shown, these are two scenes. It's shown as a single screen, and it is the full wall scale, floor to ceiling. So the figures are slightly larger than life, and they're sort of usually coming at you. My next question is, are you familiar with the sensation of going into a high-rise building either early in the morning or late at night when there's no one else there? Larissa Sansour is Palestinian, born in Jerusalem, living in London. And in her work, it's called Nation as State. And the idea is that Palestine, being compromised in territory, becomes organized into a single skyscraper. And so a woman enters, she goes into the floor, and each floor represents a different city in the area of Palestine. There are ads in the elevator that address various things that are problems, restrictions in travel, water supply, lack of food. She gets to the 13th floor, which is Jerusalem, and it's shown as a divided city with the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the background. And she gets to a place that's like an apartment where she goes and gets a watering can, and she waters a tree outside of the window. And when she stands back, you can see that she's pregnant, and she looks out the window, and that's the work. And I find it a really interesting piece of political art, but also it's classical in its use of surrealism. Surrealism uses popular culture, it uses the idea of the void, it uses the evocation of timelessness, of distortion, of altered scale, of hyper-reality, of an ominous presence, a dry wit, even a kind of absurdity, and it takes your thoughts past the everyday into, again, a kind of surrealism. My next question to you is, when I say the word pink, what comes to mind? Richard Mossa may change your idea about this color. He studied photography in the US at Yale and in London. He's Irish. And he was a war photographer by trade, and he was in Gaza and in Iraq. And he found out that there was a special film called aerochrome that had been used during World War II so that you could focus on something and see something that was camouflaged. But he found out that it was going to be discontinued by Kodak. And so he got all that he could. He wasn't even sure what he was going to do with it. And this, what you're seeing is just one bit that we're repeating, but the way that this work is installed, it exists on several screens around a room. And he studies the rebels, you can see here, and he was attracted to the Eastern Congo. He said there are at least 30 rebel groups that have been fighting so long they don't remember what the ideologies are. And that it seemed to him such an impossible situation, but one that was ignored by the rest of the world, and he wanted to shine light on the horrible humanitarian tragedy. 5.5 million people were killed. There were all sorts of atrocities and every kind of atrocity that you can imagine. And he, as his experience as a war photographer, he embedded himself with different groups that he followed. And he had 35 reels of this material, and each one is about 11 minutes. And he used an Arriflex SR2 movie camera, and he took a friend with him. They actually remained friends after, but I can imagine, hey, I've got this really, this idea, I want to go do this. When they came back, they couldn't find anyone to process it. So they had to wait and research, and they finally found somebody that would, and it took them about 6 months. And then they did this installation. It actually was the winner of the top prize at the Venice Biennale. And he felt after it was done that he should return to the Congo, for what reason one can only imagine, because it's so very dangerous. And he tells a story that he contracted a driver, and the guy was very, very arrogant and not paying attention, and drove them off a bridge, and the car flipped about 25 feet into a ravine, and here he is doing first aid with the driver in a swarm of mosquitoes in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, and he says, that was enough Congo. The work is called Enclaves because of all these different groups, and it's so shocking when you see it because it's all real people. There are no actors here. When you see the faces of the women who've been abused, or the people who are extorting them, or the rebels, these are the real people. And so his idea was to call attention to this torn, conflicted, dangerous place. But with this special film, it gives it this pinkish tone. So when you enter this room, there's this glow. And then as you get more and more into what it is, it becomes more haunting and almost more riveting than if he had been shooting as naturalistic kind of work. I think it's quite a witness from a humanitarian perspective. He was named by Foreign Policy magazine as a leading global thinker. And for me, it's bold, it's brilliant, it's heart-wrenching, it's mind-expanding, it's appalling, it's beautiful, and it changes forever how you feel about the color pink. Also, I should say, he's the most lighthearted person when you meet him. And I found it quite surprising because as I look in his eyes, I thought, what these eyes have seen. So this is Sigalit Landau, who's Israeli, so now we see sort of the other side. And what she did was create this circle of watermelons in the middle of the Dead Sea. And again, you're seeing two, but actually it's one big picture, usually the size of a wall. Sometimes it's shown on the floor. And what happens is it comes off screen. It's sort of frozen, but what happens is it unwinds with her and all the way off the screen. So a bit of poetry. Sometimes people have described the watermelons that are gashed into as a commentary on bloodshed in the Middle East, but the artist says, you know, it's actually for color, it's much more aesthetic, and of course it refers to Spiral Jetty, the famous work. And when you look at this work, what you're not seeing is how it was made, which is a giant crane is over this, shooting down this way. But it's so lyrical when you see it, you kind of don't think. And I thought we had some samples of the making of, but that's how it was put together. My next question is, what history can be swept away, and what should we try to preserve? This is Hector Zamora. It's called Abuso da Historia, the abuse of history, 20 persons and 300 tropical plants. And it does have sound that we couldn't access, but it takes place in an old hospital, mental hospital, and it's about to be razzed and turned into an art space and a tourist space. So this poor, beautiful building. And he staged this performance, but also made it a setting for the video. And in a way, preserved it, despite the attempt at wiping out this architectural legacy. So, in a way, he's asking, are those of us who watch and do nothing while architecture is swept away, are we at fault? And this idea of the displacement of architecture turns up now in Indian art a lot and in Chinese art, where massive high-rises have taken the place of old neighborhoods and more historical buildings. So it's not only here. And I find what is interesting about the work is he presses a lot of different emotional buttons at once. It becomes a kind of symphony. You're not even sure where to look, and you can imagine what the sound is of all these plants being hurled. So he makes something that's cathartic, it's absurd, it's disturbing, and it's hilarious. My next question is, can the human body stand for the collective body of ideas? And hasn't that always been the role of the mission of figurative sculpture? This work is actually this big, and it's embedded in the floor. And the sound is, the figure is screaming up, I am a worm and you are the flower.
Je suis un ver, et moi tu es une sœur, tu aurais fait tout mieux, tu aurais fait tout mieux.
And it's called Selfless in a Bath of Lava, and it's the Swiss artist Pipolati Rist. And you have to keep in mind this was 2008, this was 1994, so way before selfies and way before sex tapes were so common. And she says that her notion is the body can be a landscape. And her work is distinguished because it's sensual but really not, it's kind of unsexualized. And she can work on a scale this big, or, next. So her work can be this big, or it can be, as the title of this work, Pour Out Your Body, 7,354 cubic meters. This is at the Museum of Modern Art, where it was surrounding, and in the center was a giant sofa in the shape of a donut that you threw yourself on. And here, you saw tulips and bodies, and there was no linear narrative, but all sorts of intuitive imagery. And here, everybody was a flower, and everybody was a worm. And one of the bigger it wasn't even really controversial. There's a point at which the screen is sort of flooded with red, which was clearly menstrual blood, in the idea that this was something that was not a scandal, but something that's part of regeneration and rejuvenation and the next phase of things. So she says, the visitors bring their own bodies into the museum, and that's different than the media coming into your living room. And I like to think of her work as unleashing the confines of figurative sculpture into a kind of exuberance with all the joy and trauma that that involves. Doug Aiken also exploits scale and the power of scale. And this is a work that he did at our museum. It was called Song One. And he took an old doo-wop song. And the song is, I Only Have Eyes for You. I only have eyes for you. Is the yearning for love and romance in Hollywood. And as it says, I only have eyes for you, so it had the romance that we always look to the ending of the Hollywood film to have. You can imagine that this almost killed our technical crew. So I had the pleasure of informing them that it, in fact, was not the biggest work that I knew. Let's look at Rafael Ozona Hammer. This was a work done in Mexico City, where people could go online and make the lights move.
Me dijo mi mamá que esas luces las puede manejar uno que tenga ¿qué? Internet. Ah, sí, vamos a verlas.
No, más que nada son sistemas computarizados manejados de luces, pero no interviene nada de internet.
Sí,
son sistemas.
Sí, sí interviene
¿Eso sí
porque
es internet?
sí. de cada parte de la República hicieron sus diseños para que aquí juntaran las luces y se vieran
Revista
en
él.
5 minutos los diseños y pasan el nombre y la dirección del chavo que los hizo.
And while it doesn't have the classical definition of moving image, I wanted you to be able to see, again, the technologies that are enabling all kinds of different interpretations. This is one of my favorite pictures. Okay, your next question is, who doesn't love to hate McDonald's French fries?
Esta es la próxima pregunta.
There's a group called Superflex, and it's 3 guys who work together as collectives. And one of the things that's happened a lot in the last, say, 6 or 8 years is a lot of artists are working as collectives. And these guys don't always do media or film. They do various kinds of projects, and they call them tools. And one of their projects was, they're very interested in exploring socioeconomic options. So one was they helped Brazilian farmers create and distribute a drink made out of the guarana plant. They helped people in Thailand cultivate biogas to use for lamps as an alternate electricity. They had a convenience store in the States we call 7-Eleven, where their experiment was when people came to check out, they said, oh, that's okay, it's free. And they just filmed people going like, you know. And one of my favorite things that they did in New York was they snuck into a Wall Street bank executive bathroom, and they photographed it and they measured it. And then they recreated it in a very, very low-down diner. So you're in this kind of greasy spoon, and then you go upstairs, and this bathroom looks like something spectacular. So they always have a great subversive thing, and what they did here was they built a replica of McDonald's in a kind of a pool. They shot it in Bangkok on a soundstage. And what's interesting, you see the water come at the beginning. It comes under the door. So you don't know if it's broken plumbing. You don't know if it's an ecological disaster. You don't know what's really causing the flooding. Or is it simply global corporate apocalypse? It's not clear. But like the French fries, you can't help but find it delicious, and you can't stop watching it. And so it could have all these meanings, or it could be what Bruce Lee says, which is, be water, my friend. Empty your mind. Be formless and shapeless like water. And my question to you is, who hasn't succumbed to becoming mesmerized by the home shopping channel? And the way that it worked is, they staged in Berlin in the Huff Theater a live broadcast that resembled home shopping. And it had the cheesy music and the cheesy narrators. Only instead of products, they sold experiences. And there were 3 experiences you could bid on. The first experience was you could be interrogated as people were under the Stasi, or you could participate in a softcore historical French 17th century porno, or telenovela style, you could have a family confrontation. This was live and it was broadcast. So you can imagine you're surfing the channels and you come across this opportunity. They selected people from the people who responded, and the next day, 24 hours later, they brought the people they'd selected to do these various things, and then afterward, they interviewed them about why in the world they wanted to do these things. And on the stage, they recreated them. So the first was a middle-aged gentleman who chose Stasi, and they say, why would you want this? And he said, you know, I used to go back and forth between East Germany and in Berlin, and they always stopped me and just held me up forever, and they were so rude, I kind of miss it. The second one was the porno opportunity, and they chose a young student. He was bearded, and they show up and say, okay, well, here are the characters. You saw them acted out. Which one would you like to be? And he wanted to be one of the women, so they put this thing on him with his beard, and off they went with the porno. And the last one was a telenovela-style confrontation with your family. And it was a guy whose mother and aunt had not taken seriously when he was in the hospital. So they fly in the guy, he's in the hospital bed, and they bring in the aunt and the mother, and he says, you didn't care, you didn't come, and they're crying and carrying on, and you're watching. So it's not only on the stage live, but it's being filmed and broadcast. And now when they show the work, you go into a caravan in a trailer, and you turn on the TV set, and this is what you see. So what was fantastic about this was the mashup of real and not real, and surreal and too real, and televised and broadcast and all these things. You had a question about this one in particular?
Yeah, and is that a thing calling for real, or is that the name of the...
No, it's an artist. It's an artist as well as it's not the other Phil Collins.
Ah, okay.
Good question. The next one is Hito Sturjal, and she is a professor of media and a writer and a celebrated documentarian, and she made this work. Most of her works are in the form of lecture, so there's a voiceover, and it's called How Not to Be Seen.
A fucking didactic educational MOV file.
And she goes through all these different ways you can be absorbed into the background. There's one scene of people dancing, and then they become kind of pixels. And it's a lot about surveillance and how you can hide and how you cannot hide. And also she says, well, if you want to become invisible, you can become impoverished. Or you could become a woman over 50. Or, I mean, she goes through this, which she is. And it's about falling through the digital cracks. Very interesting about this condition of over-visibility and invisibility that coexist in our lives these days. And then also the utter psychic invisibility of humans and humanity. And she's, like Hitchcock, is always in her works. And I saw one work where I was watching it first and I didn't see her and I didn't see her, and it was 2 guards in a museum. And then I saw she's sitting on the bench and she's silhouetted with her bun and that she's in it. So even though she tells you how to be invisible, she's always seen. My next question is, has anybody ever noticed how a lighthouse, when it sends out its beam, it seems to have a kind of volume? Anthony McCall? Anthony McCall creates work. He was a career, was on the rise in England. And one of his famous works was he had a grid in a field, huge field, and fires happened, and the smoke and the fires created this massive sort of land work. He was very celebrated and invited to New York to show at the Museum of Modern Art, and leaving Southampton, he looks back at the country that he's abandoning, and he sees the beam of the lighthouse. And the first work he creates when he comes to the States is called Line Describing a Form, and it's shot from, you can see here a little bit, it's shot from a projector. But when he first made these works, he needed to fill up the room with some sort of smoke so that you could see the volume of the thing. So he had people come and smoke. And the Rotterdam Film Festival a couple of years ago staged the last opportunity to see it as it was meant to be seen. And because so many people were smoking, they didn't have any trouble finding people to fill it up. But now, what happened is, he gets to the States and his career flatlines. So he becomes a book editor, and actually a very successful book editor. 20-some years pass, and the Whitney asked if he would recreate Line Describing a Form. And now you have machines that can make the fog. You don't have to have smoke, and you have digital works to be able to create the image. And what's wonderful is you walk into this space and you see the light, and then it's like you can see here, it's like you are immersed in something and you're not even quite sure what it is. It feels like the end of the world when they say, yes, you go toward the light. Well, I asked him to be in this show that we were doing, and it was called Dreams, and he says, but my work is about intellectual abstractions. And I said, yeah, but the reason people remember it is because of the phenomenological experience of walking through this memorable soup of atmosphere and light. And I mention this because a lot of people say, well, how do you know that's what the artist thinks it should be or it should mean? And I say this even to artists. An artwork is like a child. It goes out into the world and it has a life of its own. And we don't know why the Mona Lisa was painted, but we haven't thrown it away yet. So again, outside what the intention of the artist is, there's something with works that are strong. Robert Wilson is mostly known as a dramaturge, and he was invited for a residency in the Louvre. And the first work that he installed was his bedroom, as it exists in New York. And then he went into the Louvre collection, and with this work, Death of Marat, and let's look at the next one. This portrait work, he used Lady Gaga to recreate the works in the Louvre. And between her acting and then simulated background, they recreated the essence of these works. Now, a portrait is always a portrait of the artist's style, even more than the sitter. Imagine your portrait by Rembrandt, and imagine your portrait by Warhol. So here we have one approach to portraiture. Let's go to Jamie Zeigelbaum. And this is the artist, but you'll see what he's doing in a minute, I hope. It's called Doorway to the Soul, and what he did was, online there's something called Turk workers, mechanical Turk workers, and they're people who are online all day, and they troll for things they can do that they get paid for online, and they're usually little tiny activities, and they make maybe a few pennies here, a few pennies there, but it mounts up. So he puts out a call for Turk workers, and they're paid 25 cents to align themselves in a template and sit there 1 minute. And then he collects these works and he makes an algorithm so that they morph into one another. But the effect of the work is almost like a portrait bust on a pedestal. And as you can see here. So the next work you saw when you came in, so we won't look at the whole thing because I think you've all seen it, but we can play a little. And this is called Crops. We had the sound before, no? And I use it here because it's another work that references the internet, and this is how. The artist collected crop circles in the US, thousands of images off the internet. He puts them on top of each other, and then he colorizes them almost the way one would paint. And then what moves around the crop, the circle, is the arm of the irrigation, and it works like a clock. And then I think everybody heard about this work, The Clock by Christian Marclay. And this work lasted 24 hours. And what he did was to choose images from films and from TV of watches and clocks and synchronize them to the actual time of day. Now, it was shown on a, let's see some of it. It was shown on a huge screen with a bunch of comfortable sofas. This was a mock-up. There's even a better one where the screen is even bigger. And so and these are some of the stills that are within it. And you have to say, well, is it just an archive or is it something more? And what happens with the clock is it endlessly draws attention to its own artificiality, but all art does. And it transpires in the present. So to endure the whole thing, you're really giving quite a chunk of your life, but a lot of people did it. And I've been very curious about this type of work, and particularly these long duration works, because for me, art is an investment in a different kind of time. It takes you out of the normal flow, even though this one was the time. And actually, this is hilarious. It was kind of temporal flypaper. People say, oh yeah, I get it. And then they'd stop, and then they'd get comfortable, and then the person next to them were like, no, wait. You know, as if they were manufacturing the suspense. But really what they're doing is watching the hourglass, the time of their life, pour out. A fact of life is how in a second everything can change. And Origash took a painting, a famous still life painting by Cotin, and recreated it, and then digitized. This work is shown on a flat screen, and then the bullet comes through, and then everything goes into slow motion. So with these works, we've seen time looped, time arrested, time passing. And for me, what media does is it provides a kind of solace, an escape, an enlightenment, an enrichment of my own precious moments, as well as a very unusual livelihood. So I thank you for sharing your time with me and for you helping us navigate this unusual field.